Brought you the news as it broke last night. President Obama's first major military offensive is now underway in the Helmand province of Afghanistan. Thousands of Marines have stormed into areas previously off-limits to coalition troops. Their aim to clear insurgents from the bitterly contested region before the nation's presidential election in August. Apparently, there's been very little resistance so far. The Taliban seem to have done what they always do, head for the hills and wait to pounce. Grim news from another part of the country, though, as an American soldier is taken captive by the Taliban. Martin Patience has this report from Kabul.
Midnight in Afghanistan. This is Operation Strike of the Sword, a mission for 4,000 US Marines. It's the first major military offensive under President Obama's strategy to stabilize the country.
It's really disrupting their ability to reinforce any area, because every area is under pressure at the same time, which buys us that time to establish ourselves in the community, meet the elders, and start working closely with the people before the Taliban can regroup and figure out what their next step's going to be.
The scale of this operation hasn't been seen in Afghanistan since the overthrow of the Taliban. The aim is to change the momentum of this war. Helmand is the largest province in Afghanistan, 23,000 square miles. It borders Pakistan to its south and Kandahar to the east, and is the Taliban's main stronghold. Today, 4,000 US troops stormed Taliban-controlled villages south of the Helmand River. The Americans joined 9,000 British troops in Helmand since 2006. Their focus is on securing the south, while the British continue to look north. President Obama outlined his administration's goals for Afghanistan.
The key strategy for us at this point, the benchmarks of success that we've laid out are we building an Afghan national army and police structure that can secure itself without the assistance of NATO forces or US forces.
In the east of the country, a US soldier is being held by insurgents. The circumstances behind his capture aren't clear. This is just the start of what will be a long and bloody campaign, and US commanders must know that they need to end what they call the stalemate in the south if this campaign is to be considered a success. Martin Patience, BBC News, Kabul.
Well, for more on this military operation and the overall US strategy in Afghanistan, I spoke a brief time ago with Michael O'Hanlon, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. So, Michael, 4,000 US troops in the southern Helmand River Valley. Is this a taste of things to come, this kind of operation?
Yeah, I think so. You know, we're building on what the British have been doing in Helmand province, but just like the Canadians in Kandahar, with not enough people and not enough troops, none of us have had enough aggregate capacity. We still may not have enough, but we're trying, and we're simply dispersing forces now. It's essentially a tactical redeployment of forces to establish positions in much more of the province along this important river valley. I would not call it an offensive. I would call it a tactical redeployment. I think that's the primary effect. Of course, we would in some ways welcome the opportunity to fight a stand-up battle against the Taliban as part of this operation, but I doubt very much the Taliban will do us that favor, just as they've learned not to fight the Brits or the Canadians or others in the South in recent years, and to, of course, do the classic insurgent guerrilla tactics of hit-and-run ambush and the use of improvised explosive devices.
Right, so they've run away, haven't they? I mean, they're not engaging the Americans in a fight. Now, is that a problem? Because it means that you have to basically stick around and wait for them to come down from their hideouts?
Well, it's predictable. It certainly is harder than defeating them directly. And yes, they've been quite effective in this way. You know, back in 2006, for example, they did try to fight the Canadians in Kandahar, and they lost. And it would have been nice if they had wanted to have those kind of fights some more, but they learned their lesson. It's a smart enemy, unfortunately, as we all know all too well, especially the Brits, Canadians, and Americans who have already done so much fighting against them in Afghanistan. But I think that it's expected. It's not a surprise, and we have a strategy that's meant to deal with that fact, because we're going into these parts of Helmand province to stay. And when you stay, you begin to partner with local authorities, local security forces, and local citizens, and you develop the kind of human networks you need to ultimately find and truly take on the Taliban down the road.
So what they're trying to do in Afghanistan is to replicate the kind of successes they had in Iraq, where they did the same sort of thing. Is that right?
Well, you could say that, but you could also take a broader historical sweep and say to adopt the same sort of practices that have been the best in counterinsurgency through many decades in many places. And whether it's the British in Malaya or the Americans in the Philippines or a few other cases, the basic fact of counterinsurgency is you have to make the individual local citizen feel like they have more to gain by working with the government and with the government's allies than with the insurgents, and to protect them while they make that calculation. So that's what we're finally figuring out. Yes, it's what we did in Iraq after the surge began, and not until then, unfortunately. And yes, I think the basic theory should be applicable in Afghanistan as well.
Got to leave it there. Michael O'Hanlon, thanks for your analysis.
My pleasure. Thank you.
British troops are, of course, also on the ground in Afghanistan, engaged in Operation Panther's Claw. The offensive is not without its own high costs. Lieutenant Colonel Rupert Thornlow of the Welsh Guards was killed yesterday in Helmand Province. He was the most senior British Army officer to be killed in action since the Falklands War. Trooper Joshua Hammond also died when their armoured vehicle hit a hidden bomb. A few weeks ago, the BBC's Hugh Edwards spoke to Lieutenant Colonel Thornlow about his experiences.
The latest British offensive against the Taliban, called Operation Panther's Claw, started just a fortnight ago. But tackling the Taliban in their stronghold was always going to be an exceptionally dangerous mission. Lieutenant Colonel Rupert Thornlow was the highly regarded commanding officer of the 1st Battalion Welsh Guards, and he's the most senior army officer to be killed in action since the Falklands War 27 years ago. He was just 40 years old, with a young family, and was killed when his Viking armoured vehicle hit a roadside bomb. Trooper Joshua Hammond of the 2nd Royal Tank Regiment lost his life in the same attack. Another 6 soldiers were badly injured. It's been a very costly tour for the Welsh Guards. Major Sean Burchell was killed last month, Lieutenant Mark Lawrence Everson in May, and Lance Sergeant Toby Fasfus in April. And it was Lieutenant Colonel Thornlow's duty to pay tribute to the men he'd lost.
They were great soldiers, great Welsh Guardsmen, and their tragic deaths out here underline the very, very serious and dangerous nature of what the mission out here sometimes involves.
His fellow Welsh Guardsmen are keeping
And
up.
less than 3 weeks ago, at the Queen's birthday parade, I asked Lieutenant Colonel Thornlow about the challenges his battalion was facing.
Hello, Hugh. Yeah, very much looking forward to seeing the parade. Reminds us all of home.
And what are the men there? What's the mood there among the men? It's been a tough 2 months for you so far.
It has. It's been a very busy couple of months, but we're upbeat. This is a task we believe in, and I think we all think we're doing extremely well.
This is where the latest operation has been taking place. It's a few miles north of Lashkar Gah, deep in Taliban territory. Every soldier is aware of the threat from hidden bombs. Last week, the BBC filmed a Taliban bomb factory. These devices, time and again, have proved too powerful, even for armoured vehicles. There will be some searching questions. Why, for example, were the men travelling in a Viking vehicle when they're supposed to be restricted to less high-risk areas? Operation Panther's Claw will continue, but the latest losses have been described as a devastating blow to the army, and Prince Charles, Colonel of the Welsh Guards, said he was deeply saddened by tonight's news.
Hugh Edwards reporting there. And on the heels of the US troop withdrawal from Iraq cities and towns at the beginning of the week, Joe Biden landed there today. The Vice President intends to use this unannounced visit to meet Iraqi leaders and the remaining US commanders and troops. President Obama recently appointed him to help coordinate Iraqi policy, laying the groundwork for a full withdrawal of US forces by 2012.
The fight against the Taliban in Afghanistan has reached a whole new level, with both US and British troops attacking them in their strongholds. The operation is part of a surge aimed at securing the area ahead of elections later this year.